let's be introduced to George Pace, who's going to be our first speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. And I really thank you for attending. And I'm George Pace, and I'm going to talk about the Insider's Guide to Keep Pace with ChatGPT. Now, normally on a title slide, there's not a lot to talk about. But in the spirit of AI being everywhere, I want to give my disclaimer that absolutely no AI was used in the creation of this particular presentation. Now, as a lifelong technology practitioner, I've been involved with disruptive technologies throughout my career. And I can tell you that there is a pattern that happens every single time. And I have the pattern here. On the left-hand side, there's all the excitement, the fear of missing out. It's the next best thing. And over a period of time, from months to years, it eventually becomes ubiquitous, at least some parts do. The problem is day one, day two, month one, there's very little guidance as to how to, quote unquote, keep pace or know how to think about these technologies. And that's really what the value that I'm providing is to help people visualize how they can use these tools sooner rather than later. Now, one of the reasons that ChatGPT, at least in my opinion, has become so popular is this holy grail of simplicity. And when we find technologies that are very easy to use, they tend to be successful. Search, smartphones, digital assistants, self-driving cars, all of them are abstracting away complexity. And it allows people to quickly gain value without having to learn a lot. And the early days of GPT, we're finding that people are getting accustomed to typing in a question and getting a result back quickly. Now, the challenge or the dilemma is if you really want to get good at this, there is a difference between usage proficiency and what I'll call ecosystem or domain expertise. I'm focusing on how to get you to the ecosystem domain expertise versus the usage proficiency. Now, this is just a diagram I invented in a sense. I don't know if there's 4 levels or 10 levels, but this idea of where do you want to go on the journey, this at least gives you some guidance. Do you just want to be a user level where you consume it? Do you want to potentially write code or develop applications that leverage it? Do you want to be seen as a subject matter expert where you're either architecting solutions or something that's called prompt engineering, or being a disruptor, which is where think I'd like to be or am, about innovation and thinking differently about these tools. Now, the trick, none of this is easy and there's no correct answer. You're going to have to figure that out as you go along. Now, I can tell you, and I've told a lot of my friends, this has been really challenging to keep up with the rapid change. On the left-hand side, this was as of, I think, through April, all of the foundation models that have been announced, and you'll see it's a wide range, and I probably missed a few. But if you look on the right-hand side, this is what I believe is part of this ecosystem experience. And you'll notice things like plugins and government regulations and model versioning and trust. You haven't seen those topics yet, but you will today. And the trick, I would say, is focus more on the ecosystems rather than the foundation models, because the foundation models are just providing a functionality. You really want to understand the ecosystem. Now, for those that have heard of Gartner, or if you haven't, they had created this thing called the hype cycle, and I provided the Wikipedia link below. Now, there's 2 parts I want to introduce, or at least give my beliefs on where we are right now. And today, I believe we are at the top of the peak of inflated expectations. You can't pick up the newspaper to see it's going to take jobs, it's going to, do all of these, the world's going to end type proclamations. But there's this thing that happens called the trough of disillusionment. And what happens is we find out that it really doesn't do everything that was promised. This happens every single time. And then eventually you get to the plateau of productivity where it all balances out. So just understand there's a lot of inflated expectations, and this thing called the trough of disillusionment is coming. Now, I only have about 15 more minutes at this point in the deck, but what I wanted to do is give you almost a table of contents as to what I'm going to cover. Now, each one of these is a specific discipline or a specific focus in this ecosystem. And what I would say to you is that these topics may grow, but they're most certainly going to evolve. Many of these are in the early phases, such as things like regulation, which we'll talk about a little later, but realize this is going to grow, and it's probably going to grow faster than you realize. Now, one elephant that's in the room that you'll hear talk about AI and ChatGPT specifically is this idea of self-awareness or sentience. And it's a great, nice topic to talk about. But if we dig a little deeper, you can see that, for example, Time Magazine did an investigative study where they found that OpenAI used Kenyan labor to help make it less toxic. And prompt engineering, there's a discipline to understand how to talk to these models to get the most out of them. And then finally, these models are known to generate incorrect answers, which is called hallucinations. Now, what I would say to you is sentience is a nice topic to write about. It's a nice topic to read, but I really wouldn't waste a lot of time on it. It's more interesting than it is important. If I had to give you a starting point to learn any of this, it starts with the terminology or the vocabulary. And like any other technology, ChatGPT and GPT has its own terminology. Hallucination I've covered, few shot learnings. I like stochastic parrots. I think that's pretty funny. Embedding, prompt engineer, tokens, trust, vectors. You need to understand the terminology, because if you want to get a job or you want to be involved in this particular space, people are going to know very quickly whether or not you understand these terms and how they're used. So another thing, when you start learning the terminology, it gives you the insights to the other topics you might find interesting that you want to learn more about. I am a visual learner, and when I started my ChatGPT journey, there was nothing that really provided me with what I call these basic blocks as to what does it look like. So I took some time and put together this diagram. So if you look on the left-hand side, it starts with engagement sources. These will be the people and things that will communicate with large language models. Now, in the middle, where I have the ChatGPT model implementation, these will be the individual pieces of a given deployment. So will we see user personalization where it learns about you? Or will the LLM have a persona? What devices will it run on? That will be kind of the main engine that you talk to. Additionally, some of these models have what are called plugins, and those plugins allow the model to do additional or provide additional capabilities. And then finally, if we look up top, how are these models created in the first place? Do they disclose what data sources they use? Have they removed the bias in them? Do they align with regulatory? Do they align with regulation? I should have said, sorry. So all of this is kind of that visual model. And if you're new to this, this is kind of something I put together. To me, a diagram is worth more than 1,000 words. And this has been very helpful for me to get a better understanding of the space. Now, don't think that ChatGPT is just about technology. There are going to be a number of skills that are needed to successfully pull off implementations. So, for example, if you are into data, you're going to have a field day in this space, because we have to figure out how to remove bias that may be within your data sets. Legal, if you look at legal and regulation, this is going to be going on for years. There's copyright lawsuits going on. There's regulation going on in countries, well, the EU has some regulation, the United States, Japan, all of the countries are trying to figure this out. There's this whole concept of safety and ethical AI. How do you make sure that what the bot outputs is going to be quote unquote safe for consumption? There are concepts around constitutional AI, where you develop a set of rules so that these AI engines can self-train themselves. And then it could even be just be the AI whisperer, as it were, that you help other people figure this out. So to me, a successful implementation is always going to be predicated on having these skill sets somewhere on your team. Ooh, what happened? There's another topic that's out there that's called explainable AI. One of the challenges with artificial intelligence in general is that it can give a response, but the question is, how did you get to that response? Now, within GPT, one of the interesting things that they have is this thing called citations. And what citations do is when it comes back with an answer, it gives you sources that were part of building that answer. So while this may not be exactly what explainable AI is, it's the start of that journey to give you deeper insights. Now, it's important that we know these models can give incorrect information. So these sources are your tool to help verify whether or not that's right. Hallucinations are real. And the unfortunate part is that ChatGPT is so easy to use that people will press the Staples Easy button to accept the answer without necessarily validating it. If there's a slide that I could spend a lot of time on, it would be this one. Now, there's this idea of trust, and how are we going to trust the output that comes from these models? Well, what I did, and I was sketching this out several different ways, but if we look at the left-hand side, you'll see that we interact with human friends, work associates, and strangers. Well, each one of those has some context of previous experience, how much do they know, what's the situation, and we build trust with individual people. When it comes to these chatbots, if we just say the first one is a Microsoft chatbot and the second one's a Google chatbot, and let's just say the third one's an Amazon chatbot. Well, if we're using Microsoft Office as an example for a whole year, that model may get to know us and our preferences. But if you now change jobs or all of a sudden move to a different tool, that tool doesn't know you. And you may find that your experience with that tool is very different. So from my perspective, you will see this topic of trust. I haven't seen a whole lot yet, but you'll see this topic of trust come up. And how do we as individuals learn to trust these models? I would say to you that expect early frustration because, again, you're not always going to know the model you're talking to. They're going to be built into products and services that we use. Right after trust, or a piece of trust, is what are your expectations for answers that come out of these AI engines? Now, if I talk to individuals, a human's not right all the time. So do we expect AI to be correct all the time? And there could be a range. It could be right. It could be accurate. It could be close enough. Or the funny one is confidently wrong. So again, it gets back to this idea that when you get an answer, you cannot assume it will always be correct. Two things to be aware of. I think the first will be, what's the situation that you're using AI, number one, and then number two, what is the magnitude of that decision? So I think between this slide and the previous slide, these are going to be the basic tenets of establishing trust with a chatbot. Another thing that we're going to come across at some point is, will these engines either augment or replace humans? This is not to suggest either one here. Rather, what would be the attributes or what are some of the considerations to get into either camp? What I would say to you on the augment side, the way I'm looking at this is these tools will help in problem solving, potentially enhancing existing processes, potentially ideation. But on the right-hand side for replace, things that are very repetitious are prime to be replaced. And in some cases, depending upon the situation, good enough may be good. So I gave presentations a few years back on this topic. And one of the things I came up with was a principle that said that which should be automated will be automated. So again, find repetitious tasks that you do day in and day out. Those are likely the first candidates to be automated. Another slide that I could spend an awful lot of time on is this idea of AI governance and safety. Now, to consume this particular slide, I would tell you to start from the left and go to the right. So the first one we've talked about a bit is data bias, data quality, and we know that there's challenges in data sets today that's not necessarily obvious. The next is in security and privacy, making sure that there's no PII or PHI included within a model. Plus, if we note the Samsung incident from about a month ago, making sure that the data, company data remains safe when a company uses these tools. There are AI detection tools to help identify when AI was used in generating an answer. There are some industry principles that most manufacturers seem to be adopting in some way, shape, or form as to when they craft their engines, what are some of the rules? Now, at that point, as we start going further, these have a much longer tail. So this idea of constitutional AI and rules, that's evolving. That's not necessarily here yet. And then country regulation and laws. This is interesting because a lot is happening within each country, and there's not necessarily a communication. So what may be true in one country, so for example, Japan is saying that there's no copyright infringement. Another country may say there is copyright infringement. So understanding those pieces and parts is going to be challenging. What I was reminded of when I put this slide together is Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, who once said, "With great power comes great responsibility." So where do you start? Well, what I would say to you is go back to the 4 levels. Figure out where you want to be on the spectrum. And I gave you a few more ideas as to how to do it. What I would say to you is this. There used to be an idea that you could be a fast follower. And I'm telling you, it's not going to work this time. There's too many things in the pipeline that you need to keep current with. So if you're pushing this off, if you're not dedicating enough time to this, I would say you're doing this wrong. In terms of education resources, there's a lot of free stuff that's out there. I would say for most people, you could start to Intro to Prompt Engineering. There's an open source site, learnprompting.org, has some fascinating content, and the best part of all, it's free. If you want to get an idea of where all of this is going, archive, arxiv.org, there's reams of white papers that are being stored there that talk about the different ways people are looking at these models. It's fascinating reading. Now, it's not here today, but it's something that's going to come tomorrow. For example, intelligent agents is one of the topics if you want to look up something, look that up. There's discussion groups, and I can tell you some of the best AI groups I found have been on Facebook. I'm part of about 4, I think, and some of the information that I see in those groups has been fantastic. Community sites, there's probably ground zero is huggingface.co. I would tell you to get an account there. That's free also. There are AI tooling sites. When I put this deck together, bestwebs.com was one of them. You're going to need some type of site to keep track of all of these products and services because there's going to be a lot. And of course, there's going to be failures as well. But I found that to be a good tool for navigating the space. And then finally, just on feeds, this is the old school newsletter and search. TLDR is, I guess, one of the more current ones. I like that one. And then even setting up Google Alerts. All of this is good stuff. I've said this for many years. If you're not spending 30 minutes a day at a minimum, you're doing it wrong. I would tell you right now, I'm probably spending about an hour a day on my own. You have to invest some time into this. And if the train's moving and the train's not stopping for anybody. So what are the takeaways to keep pace with this topic? This is going to be an exciting journey, but it's going to be uncomfortable. I can tell you that. With rapid growth comes rapid confusion. Don't expect all of the answers or all of the things that are happening to be their final state. They're going to change. In what time frame, I don't know, but they're going to change. I would say to you that this is going to be extremely hard to do on your own. I would tell you to think about a buddy system. On the next slide, I'm going to give you an idea as to what that buddy system may look like. The biggest one is, as you're learning this, understand how GPT and large language models will impact your job or career. You really have to start decomposing what it is you do and start asking yourself, is this something I do that's repetitious, or could that piece be automated? There will be 2 types of job losses. One will be those that all of the skills can be automated, and then there will be those situations where some of the skills can be automated. Those are going to be 2 very different use cases. And then finally, as you go through this education, realize to focus on the experience, immerse yourself in this. Don't just mimic the examples that you see. The reason you really need to get your head thinking differently about this tool, if you try and make the tool fit into the way you're thinking, that's not ideal. And fortunately, I've had a tagline that I thought was applicable for this particular page. Technology moves fast. You can move faster if you keep pace with technology. So how do you keep pace with this? Well, one of the things I've been doing for the past 4 years, if you can believe this, is I've been streaming every Sunday at 9 a.m. I stream to Facebook, I stream to Twitch, I stream to LinkedIn, and I stream to Twitter. So if you're following me on LinkedIn, you'll get the notification. All of my past videos, and I did videos on this back in 2017 and 18 on AI, are on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/keep pace. I do occasionally blog on Substack. So if you want, you can either subscribe to YouTube or subscribe to keeppace.substack.com. Yes, I do have a last name I can do something with. And finally, my website, where I have to, it needs a little refreshing. But that's all I had for you. I hope you found this both entertaining and informative. And Gerald, I give it back to you.
Wow. What does your timer say? I know you have a timer. What did you come in at?
1914.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George, for sharing your wisdom. And I listened to George's podcast that he does every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. On LinkedIn, and it's always very educational.